Aloha, this is Dr. Mike, and tonight, or if you're catching this on the replay, whenever that is, we are going to be talking about the science of alkalization. Very, very important topic, and a lot of information that I see in the marketplace that's not necessarily true. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So sit back, relax, take some notes. A little bit of a disclaimer here that all of this is meant for educational purposes, is not meant to diagnose, treat, cure, or prescribe or imply that any of these products are the sole answer to any person's individual health issues. We want to make sure that if you are going to partake in any type of health program, that you seek medical supervision of your physician. All right, with that out of the way, what are we going to be talking about in this little training? Well, we're going to go over the basics of pH. I'm going to show you guys some of the research behind acid-base balance, and then how do we help balance our pH levels? So first of all, you may be asking, what is pH? You may have heard about that, but what exactly is that? It's just a chemical term that they use to denote the potential hydrogen. It's a measure of any solution's hydrogen ion concentration. So basically, I'm going to show you guys what the scale is about, but I want you to guys start thinking in basic terms. Okay, we're going to talk about a few basic things that I want you guys to understand. And when you guys understand these things, then you can apply what I'm talking about here. So, one of the basic things here is the higher the pH, the more oxygen rich the solution is. The lower the pH, the more oxygen deprived the solution is. So when you look at the pH scale, it goes from 0 to 14, 7 being neutral. And here's another fundamental idea I want you to grasp onto, is that the higher you go on the pH scale, the more electrons you have. The lower you go, the less electrons. So the lower you go, you also have less dissolved oxygen. The higher you go, you have more dissolved oxygen. Now, when we start talking about electrons, what we want to also focus on is the movement of the electrons, which is what we call voltage. And everybody knows voltage. If we don't have moving electrons in your home, then you don't experience electricity. Same thing with your body. Our body is all about voltage. So the higher the voltage, okay, obviously there's a certain level of voltage, but the higher the voltage, the more work your body can do. We're specifically talking about the cells. So basically, when we look at the cell, it's kind of like a little car. You take in fuel, and then the fuel is combusted or metabolized, and out of that comes energy. And through the process of that metabolic reaction, our cells make exhaust. It's all fine and dandy when this is a normal process. But what happens when the exhaust is exceeding the rate that the exhaust can be curbed? That's when we start getting cellular dysfunction. And then you start decreasing in energy creation. At the core of it all, this is the engine. This is the powerhouse of the entire cell, called the mitochondria, specifically the electron transport chain. Now, the electron transport chain sits right on the walls of the mitochondria. And what happens here is that it's taking all these different nutrients and all that kind of stuff, and it's basically just moving the electrons through a gradient. That it forms a proton gradient, and the proton gradient moves the electrons through. And this is a very, very basic explanation, by the way. You can go way deeper than this. So the electrons move through the mitochondrial membrane. The protons are pumped into the intermembrane space, and it forms this gradient that then travels through this guy. And this is called the ATP synthase. This is an enzyme. This is the motor of the electron transport chain. Now, all of this engine is dependent upon oxygen and water. Okay? Just like your car. So your car needs oxygen, it needs water to run, and the output is it creates ATP. This is the normal process of it all. And through this process, it creates acidic waste. Now, the acidic waste comes in two different forms. One is volatile and one is non-volatile. And the volatile components, like carbon dioxide, is excreted through the lungs, transported through the blood, goes to the lungs, and you breathe that out. Now, non-volatile components like uric acid and all these other type of organic acid metabolites then have to go through other routes. Like one of them is the kidneys. The kidneys is one of the main acid-base balance organs in your body. If the kidneys gets bogged down with acidic waste byproducts, then it has to go through secondary routes. And secondary measures are taken to buffer out that acidic waste because your body does not like to go above certain thresholds on the pH scale. Now, when we look at pH and we start taking into voltage, okay, we start taking this into account, and we know that voltage equals the amount of work that your body's able to do, specifically the cells, right? We see that there's a correlation between voltage and pH levels, meaning that the more alkaline that the solution is, the more voltage that is able to be produced there. And more voltage means more work. What does this actually mean? Well, it means that if you needed to do more work, you needed to have more voltage. Essentially, you needed to be in an alkaline state. Okay? So, how does all this play into, am I just making all this stuff up? Well, no, there was a guy, his name was Dr. Robert Becker. And what he did was he studied salamanders, and he studied how salamanders were able to regrow their limbs. Right? Anybody familiar with salamanders? If they get one of their limbs cut off, they're able to regrow it. And what he found was that at the moment that one of the limbs was severed, they started to change the voltage, and the voltage would create a healing process. And this actually happens in any living organism. The pH will change to increase the voltage flowing to that area. You just need more electrons. Okay, so that's one of the other concepts I want you guys to remember. If you need to heal, you need more electrons, right? Just like your cell phone battery. If your cell phone battery is running low, what do? You plug it back in to get more electrons so that you can continue to do more work. Now, what are some of the symptoms of pH imbalance? Well, you see people with chronic headaches, chronic fatigue, chronic intestinal issues. You guys notice I'm using the word chronic, meaning long-term. Okay. A chronically impaired immune function, chronically elevated blood sugar, or chronically low blood sugar, right? And chronic inflammation. These are all the signs and symptoms that you have a pH imbalance, meaning that you have a more or less electrons because you're more in an acidic state. Now, some people may tell you, well, the body needs to be alkaline. True to a point, but not specific enough. Because not every part in your body has to be alkaline, right? Your stomach has to be acidic. If you want to digest food properly, your stomach has to be acidic. If the gastric acid goes to like 2.1 or 2.8, you're not going to be able to digest your food properly. Your skin also has to be acidic. If your skin becomes alkaline, that's when we see all kinds of skin infections starts popping up. Saliva about 7.1. The cell, and we're going to talk a lot about the cell because that's what we're concerned about is cellular function. The inside of the cell and the outside of the cell actually have two different types of pHs. And we're going to get into that more. Now, your blood has very little wiggle room. So anywhere between 7.35, 7.45, that's where, your blood loves to live. You go into 6, you go into 8, you are not going to be alive any longer. Pancreatic juice has to be on the more alkaline side, right? So we see that the body's pH levels varies over different parts of your organs. But when we start looking specifically at the cell and at the blood levels, we have very, very narrow ranges. Well, how does pH relate to cellular dysfunction? Well, a lot of fingers have been pointed towards different causative factors for cellular dysfunction, right? Toxins, devoid in nutrients, taken in too high caloric foods, too much stressors. Well, what do all those things do? They alter the body's pH balance. Okay, remember we're when we strip everything back, it goes back down to electrons and oxygen and nutrient delivery. Okay? So an altered pH balance is going to have decreased oxygen, is going to have decreased electrons. We reach a place, what we call systemic acidosis. That's what creates cellular dysfunction. Dr. Gunther Enderlin, he stated that the body can only be healed of any chronic illness when the blood is at a normal, okay? The normal level of blood is a slightly alkaline pH, meaning that you cannot heal an illness if you don't have enough electrons. So if you want to know the breeding ground for disease, this is the formula. Low available oxygen, poor circulation, nutrient deficiencies, and an acidic pH or lowered voltage. So if you look at pH and dissolved oxygen, it says here, as pH decreases, the concentration of hydrogen ions increases, the redox reaction is shifted to the right. Hydrogen ions and oxygen react with water, which results in a decrease of DO, which is dissolved oxygen. Okay? So when we shift the pH from 7.45 to 7.3, we are seeing a drop of about 65% dissolved oxygen. That doesn't seem like a lot in a pH move, right? Going from 7.3 to 7.45, but we're seeing a 65% increase in dissolved oxygen. And if we know that oxygen equals cellular repair or improved cellular function, now we can start to understand how the pH is being or how the pH affects the cell. All right, this is a very important one I want you guys to understand here. Okay, is that when the blood pH drops, even just slightly, we can just move like 7.365 to 7.3. Okay, just that little amount of drop is going to cause a phenomenon called the rouleau formation. It's a stacking of the red blood cells, looking like a coin stack there. And this is due to what's called the zeta potential breakdown. And basically what happens is every single red blood cell has a negative charge on it. Okay? And when the zeta potential, that negative charge starts to break down because of the pH dropping, right? You're losing electrons. What happens is the red blood cells start sticking together. When red blood cells start sticking together, you lose the amount of surface area that is available to bind oxygen. Right? So you have less oxygen binding to hemoglobin. And then when these little red blood cells have to travel through the capillaries and it's all clumped together, it's a very difficult situation. What does this mean to the cells? Well, it means that the cells are getting less oxygen being delivered to it. And ultimately, if you don't have oxygen, you cannot run that electron transport chain effectively, which eventually leads to fatigue, right? And then you start having cellular breakdown, right? Because now you start reaching for other things, right? And as humans, if we start noticing a decrease in energy production, we want to increase energy fuel sources, which is carbohydrate. So we tend to have more carbohydrate cravings, and that sends a whole downward spiral, and we can start seeing why we are in an obesity epidemic. Well, what is the effects of pH on the immune system? A lot of these studies show that when you shift the pH, okay, out of that physiological range, you get diminished immune cell activity. Okay, so you go into an acidic state, you can even go into an alkalosis. That'll shut down the immune cell migration. Well, what does that mean? Well, if your immune cells, which is the police of your body, they're on vacation, you get pathogenic things that will proliferate, right? The criminals will now run the town. Now, what they also found was that the extracellular tumor microenvironment, so all the stuff surrounding the environment surrounding the tumor, that becomes more acidic. Why? Because these tumor cells they produce way more lactic acid. And that, in and of itself, allows what's called local tumor invasion. Okay? Now, here is one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand, and it's one of the myths, is that they think that just by creating or producing an alkaline state, that's going to stop tumor growth, which is partly true, but it's not the entire truth. Right? And I'm going to show you guys why. Now, when we look at in the state of acidosis, acidosis means inflammation and an increased cortisol output, which also means an increase in fat deposition. Increase in fat deposition will start to create different types of hormones, estrogenic hormones, and that does not lead to a good place. Right? So back to tumors. Now, the hallmark of any type of cancer cell is an acidic extracellular matrix, right? So all around the cancer cells are actually way more acidic because of the production or overproduction of lactic acid. Now, the intracellular pH levels is actually alkaline. And this becomes the hard part because when people are saying, well, all you got to do is alkalize your body and you're going to stop cancer. No, that's not necessarily the truth. Tons and tons of studies that refute that. But we do know that when you curb the extracellular pH levels, you can actually, studies have shown that you can actually stop the tumor progression, okay? Because it does decrease the amount of tumor invasions. And there's tons of studies that prove that. Now, it has nothing to do though with reversing a cancerous state, okay? There's a lot more into that. So that's one of the myths I want to dispel there. Now, they have done studies that show that like terminal cancer, like end stages of cancer, that the extracellular acidity is 1,000 times more than normal. So the pH levels is really acidic there. Well, what effects does pH have on insulin? Well, this is one of my favorite studies. They showed that when they lowered the physiological pH from 7.4 to 6.9, insulin binding decreased by 50%. Okay? So the receptors for insulin were no longer sensitive to insulin. And that's a very important thing to understand, because when we see a lot of these cases of diabetes, what are they saying? Well, they're saying, well, you're not insulin sensitive anymore. They mean that the receptors for insulin, they don't play well with one another. Could it be that it's all because the extracellular fluids are more in an acidic state? Possibly, right? Because what they found was that when they restored the pH back to its physiological pH, binding returned back to normal. That was the most important thing, okay? Other studies have showed the same thing too, that metabolic acidosis induced by diet, by the way, right? In this study, they said that the strongly acidogenic diet consumed in developed countries, right, the standard American diet, produces a lifetime acidotic state exacerbated by excess body weight and aging, which may result in insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, contributing to cardiovascular risk, along with genetic causes, lack of physical exercise, and other factors. So when you take into account lifestyle and you take into account the physiological pH changing, we start to see all kinds of cellular dysfunction. So what we use is a thing called Alkaline. And this is what I want to talk to you guys about. Is this phenomenal product called Alkaline. Has over 8 patents filed, GMP certified, the World Anti-Doping Association agency taken a look at it and certified that for sport, has 27 different separate structure function claims on file with the FDA. So you got all kinds of these things, but you're like, well, why? What makes this thing so amazing? Well, if you look at it, right, you pick up a bottle of Alkaline and you take a look at it and you look at the ingredients. Yeah, it's a calcium carbonate. You got magnesium hydroxide, potassium chloride. It's like, okay. Then you may take a look. You may search Google and you're like, what the heck is potassium magnesium hydroxide? And you may start to freak yourself out because you see all these things and the chemical structure says these are potentially potentially harmful, right? They're very, very reactive hydroxides. Well, same thing goes with sodium and chloride, right? Sodium chloride, also known as table salt, if you take apart the individual components, they're very, very noxious, right? They create all kinds of havoc. But when you bind them together, table salt, you're not going to burn a hole through the table, okay? So when we look at these components, the calcium carbonate crystal and magnesium hydroxide, potassium chloride, what happens is that they use this process, and there's a specialized machine. And what they do is they use a crystallization process formed using what's called the EBC, the exact blending and compounding process. And there's all these different patents surrounding that. Okay, so you have all these hydroxides, and it's it's surrounding a calcium carbonate crystal, which stabilizes it. So essentially, you have a brand new thing that is greater than the parts of it. Well, let's take a deeper look into it. Right? We have a whole bunch of ingredients there, simple ingredients, everybody knows that. But what we're more concerned about is the extraordinary composition of it. Right? We are more concerned about the structure over it versus the composition of it. What the heck does that mean? Well, there's a vast difference between a diamond and graphite found in your pencil. If we take a look at it, they're all made out of the same thing. A diamond is made out of carbons, and graphite is made out of carbons, right? They're both exactly the same composition, vastly different structure, right? So when we take a look at the components of Alkaline, we've put it into a different structure. It's a diamond versus just plain old graphite. And when we put it into this structure, it creates a whole slew of physiological effects. That's very different than if you were to take those things separately. So how does it work? Okay. Like I said, you got that calcium carbonate crystal, you got all those hydroxide granules surrounding it, and you put it into solution, and then the hydroxides come off. It searches for hydrogen ions, the H pluses, and they meet and they neutralize and they create water. Basically, the hydroxides are a whole bunch of electrons, and it looks for a whole bunch of protons. They're good friends. They don't like to be without each other, and they bond and they make water. Pretty amazing stuff. So this is the key to this entire training. I want you guys to understand. Okay? Remember, more acidic means less electrons. More alkaline means more electrons. So when you have a lot of hydrogen ions floating around and you have an electron donor, they bond together and they make water. That's the key, guys. That's the key to all of this. So basically, Alkaline is improving the absorption of nutrients across mucous membranes. And they've done a whole bunch of studies and they found that just having nutrients alone, you wouldn't have an increase, or you would have actually a decrease in absorption without having an alkaline component there. It's shown to improve systemic health and performance, and you're delivering more electrons and neutralizing more hydrogen ions. Okay, let's get into that more. Well, people may be asking, how do you test? Yeah, you can just use pH test strips. You can test your saliva. You can test your urine. Right? If it tests less than 6.4 in your saliva, that's a very good sign that you have a lack of alkaline reserves. And the optimum level in your urine should be between 5.8 and 6.8. Very simple way to do this. Well, what's the research behind it? All right, we've done this Alkalete trial. 23 people, And what they found was that just over the course of 5 days, on average, we found a 53% acidic reduction. Pretty cool. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, we've also shown different studies, different universities actually, have taken Alkalete and have looked at, well, what does this do for human performance in like an athletic performance? Well, we know that in any type of human performance, you're going to produce lactic acid. And this is one of the things that hinders athletic performance, right? So sometimes people hit the wall because of this overabundance of lactic acid. And one of these studies have shown that it improves hydration by 21% over just standard water consumption, and it 3x the improvement of time to fatigue. So they found that the average was about, 18, 20 minutes time to fatigue without taking Alkalete. And that little graph on the right there, that yellow one, is about 60 minutes on time to fatigue. So you went from 20 minutes up to 60 minutes in time to fatigue. That's a very important thing for athletic performance. That's a huge increase, by the way, in athletic performance. Some of you guys may be asking, well, I've seen these alkaline water ionizers out there. Well, what's the deal with that? Can I just get one of those things? Well, there's a whole bunch of different studies that was done on this, and there was one that, actually a lot of them, that showed little to no effect. And then, people look at it and say, well, you take alkaline water, the studies have shown it's useless. I partly agree with that. And if you take a look deeper into the studies, especially this one study that I listed here, they showed regular water, so non-alkalized water, ionized alkaline water, and then alkaline water using alkaline minerals to alkalize it. And they found little to no effect long term, which is actually a good thing because of the next study I'm going to talk about. But when you look at the alkaline minerals that they used, I dug deeper into it. They're using calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium chloride. And remember what I said, it's structure over composition. Just because you put some of these alkaline minerals in there, it's not the same thing, right? You're talking diamond versus pencil, right? Now, there was a study that actually showed detrimental effects upon heart tissue when using ionized alkaline water. Now, they've done 2 studies on this. I don't know if this is repeatable or if this was a one-time thing, but if you have studies that's showing little to no effect on ionized alkaline water, and you have studies showing some detrimental effects in a small case, why would you want to utilize that? Here's another question I get. Well, why can't I just use sodium bicarbonate over Alkalete? Well, you could, but you're still not getting the same effects. So here was a study done where they took 150 milliliters of hydrochloric acid in a beaker, and it measured pH 2.0. And then they took the equal amounts of sodium bicarbonate and equal amounts of Alkalete, and they put it in, and they wanted to see the effects. Okay? They both had alkalizing effects. So sodium bicarbonate was able to raise the pH from 2.0 all the way to 6.0 pretty much immediately. Okay? Alkalete was a time release. So you see that over a short period of time, right? Over the course of about 14, 15 minutes, it slowly raised the pH level from 2 to 6. And then from that time forth, it slowly raised again to 6.8. And this is what we talk about when Alkalete is time released. Why is that so important? Well, if we go back here, sodium bicarbonate went from 2 to 6. Alkalete went from 2 to 6.8. That's a big difference because we're talking about a logarithmic scale, guys. Okay? So Alkalete actually neutralizes about 7 times more hydrogen ions, meaning that it's producing and releasing 7 times more electrons than sodium bicarbonate. Now, the problem with taking sodium bicarbonate outside of the salt increase is that when sodium bicarbonate hits your stomach, and you got stomach acid there, you're going to form a lot of gas. And it's going to create a lot of gastrointestinal distress. Okay? And Alkalete is working over a period of time. Now, this means that a lot less Alkalete is needed to get the same effects as sodium bicarbonate. So even though the study utilized the same amount, you could actually utilize less Alkalete to get the same effect as sodium bicarbonate. And this is the big one, hydroxides are way smaller than the bicarbonates, meaning that it would be able to absorb through the GI lining and into circulation and affect the body systemically. Right? Who cares if you're affecting the GI tract, because you actually want the GI tract acidic and alkaline and acidic, right? Stomach, small intestine, large intestine. You want that in its proper pH state. You want to affect the extracellular matrix of the cells, right? So if the hydroxides are smaller, it's going to be way easier to get into those extracellular matrices. There was a clinical study done in osteoporosis. A 50-year-old, she had severe osteoporosis. Between the years of 1994 to 1999, she's showing a 19% bone loss. And then in 1999, began treatment with Alkalete over the course of 15 months. And at the end of that 15 months, they did another DEXA scan, and they showed that she had an increase of 5% in bone density. So here you can see the lab readout in bone mineral density. And in 1999, they stopped the decrease in bone density. It's pretty amazing. Here's another clinical study that was done on interstitial cystitis. This is a very common thing, actually, that you feel a lot of bladder urgency and bladder pain. And they did another clinical study with 23 participants, and they found a 40% decrease in urgency, 34% decrease in frequency of urination, and a 52% decrease in pain. Pretty phenomenal, right? Considering that a lot of times these people are on pain medications for interstitial cystitis. So when you can swap out a pain medication and utilize something like Alkalete to decrease your urgency, frequency, and pain. So we have 3 different forms. Actually, there's a couple more, but 3 main forms of Alkalete that we utilize. One, obviously, we have the Alkalete capsules, which is our cornerstone form of Alkalete. And then we also have Alkalete in another product called pH2O, which is our hydration support, and Fun, which is a sports hydration, more of like a sports recovery drink. And these are the 3 main forms that we utilize. So pH2O can be something that you utilize as your hydration methods all throughout the day. And then Alkalete, we usually recommend taking that in the morning and in the evening when you go to bed. And then Fun, utilizing that for a post-workout recovery regimen, because there's some other things, trace minerals, along with some branched chain amino acids and all those kind of things. So we got a whole slew of different ways. And if we know that, one, we're delivering more electrons, we're delivering more oxygen, and we're improving hydration levels, we can be utilizing these things all throughout the day. So we know how important pH is, because as you age, you're secreting and you're producing way more acidic metabolites. We have an acidic lifestyle. All of these things, we're just building that up. We're decreasing the amount of electrons we have in our body. So we need to build that back up. We got to plug our bodies back in to recharge our bodies. Alkalete's one of the best ways that I've found. And this is, something that I do recommend to all of my patients. This is a cornerstone thing that anybody that comes to me, we're going to be utilizing this as a foundational thing, because if we don't got enough electrons, remember that the cell needs to increase its voltage in order to heal. So this is why I love Alkalete and why I recommend it to all my patients. So hopefully this was educational, entertaining, and empowering for you. That's my whole goal with all of these trainings. And if you have more questions, you can either reach out to me or you can reach out to the person that sent you to watch this. Till the next time, this is Dr. Mike signing off saying be well and aloha.